Hello, hello, coders. Excuse me. Hello, coders. Welcome to another How to Code Well live coding stream. And we are going to be working on some more good practices or bad practices with PHP. And I'll be teaching you various different things regarding file names, directory names, PHP interfaces, traits, and abstract classes, and a whole lot more. Excuse me, I am still fighting off this annoying cold, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm I'm hoping that the dogs won't interrupt the live stream, but if they do, then just know that the two doggies that we got downstairs, they are spaniels, bit mad, and you may hear some doggy noises and whatnot. I've just finished bathing one because he just came back from a walk, all very muddy. So yeah. Anyway, enough talking about dogs. Let's get into some PHP code. Now, let's just click over to here so we can get into this directory. This is what I was showing you before last week. And we were playing around with some nested ifs, some formatting variables, some strings, and some comments, and we were talking about variable sizes and whatnot. I've added some more to this. So we've got directory names, file names, PHP interfaces, and PHP traits, and some abstract classes and other bits. And we'll talk about other things to do with PHP bad practices as well. But as you can see, this is starting to get quite large, and I think over the next few weeks I'll obviously start adding more and more to this. So if you're following along, then you will learn a lot in terms of PHP, and it's geared more towards perhaps the junior devs. But if you are a senior dev and you're watching this, then hopefully this will refresh your memory on certain things, and or at least give you justification as to why things are done in the way they are. So let's take a look at the directory names. That's the first one. Okay, so what we have are some markdown files, some good and some bad markdown files. I've also got this directory in here, entity. This is what I was using to display or to describe certain things. So for example, we've got some backup files here. We've got file names that are in the wrong sort of case, I should say, and we'll discuss all those in a minute. I'm just going to grab a drink real quick before we actually start diving in, and we'll start taking a look at some of this stuff. Bear with me just a second. I'm on orange juice or orange squash and a little bit of creatine. Oh, right. Okay, so directory names, bad practice. Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to discuss directory structures in PHP and why directory structures need to be conforming to certain standards within PHP. So here I'm saying the below directory structure is overly complicated and doesn't follow any naming conventions. So if you see here, we've got entities. So this is the first level, right? The first level of the directory structure. So we've got entities. That's one structure. We've got entities hyphen BKP. Now BKP is usually used for backup, right? And then we've got that structure in there. That we've got entity, which is different from entities because we're now not pluralizing this. So entity. In here, in all of these, we've got base. We've also got abstract in there. Base is capitalized, abstract is not. And then we've got entity, which is a lowercase entity. And again, we've got base, and then we've got product type, that's another directory, and then down here we've got entity underscore BKP. Now all of this could go in one sort of, all of this could be living in a single directory structure, right? So all of these files, they don't overwrite each other. They're all fairly unique. Well, they are unique. So entities -bkp will not overwrite this one. So all of this could be in a code base as we speak. And excuse me, I've certainly seen a lot of this happen, and I've also done this myself. We're going to talk about why some of these are bad practices and which ones are better practices than others. So the first thing I want to talk about is pluralization. Okay, so a choice between entities and entity should be made, and I should say it should be required. I'll just change that now. And it should be a required standard throughout the code base. This is very important because you see a lot of like these directories where they've got an S on the end or ES on the end, controllers versus controller, entities versus entity, or you've got repositories rather than repository. It gets a little bit confusing. So you want to pick one. Now, this could be personal preference, but as long as you stick to one, and as I mentioned before, standards require consistency. So as long as you're consistent in what you choose throughout the code base, it's very confusing when someone is looking at a code base for the first time and they're like, this says controllers, but then that says controller. So which one do I use? Or when we discuss file names, we've got pluralization issues there too as well. So you want to focus on the directory because the directory will dictate the contents of that directory. So usually if the directory itself is not pluralized, then the files within that directory are also not pluralized, because what the developer is doing is that they're subconsciously following a pattern. So if the directory isn't pluralized, then the file name shouldn't be pluralized, and so on and so forth. Okay, so then we start talking about the upper and lower cases. Give me a sec, just a mo. I have lost. There we go. I just lost a window, and it's back, and it's back. Let's put that back. No, why is that disappearing? Okay, don't worry about that. It's okay. I'm going to put that on another screen because that's going to irritate me. There we are. Okay, I need bigger screens. All right, so the next one is upper and lower cases. Okay, so these are in the name of the directory itself, right? What do you choose, upper and lowercase? So you've got entity lowercase e or entity uppercase e. Again, if they're side by side, then they're both valid. The file system isn't going to say one or the other, right? That is dangerous when you're moving to various different operating systems, though, because in certain cases, one will override the other one. Okay, so be very cautious with this. So a choice between upper and lowercase that should be made, and it should be a required standard throughout the code base, right? So decide which one you want to use and stick to it. Now, when we start talking about PSR, the standardization for things like auto-loading and whatnot, there is a convention that one must follow. However, the way I have written these tutorials, it's not assuming that that's what you're doing. It's just saying, look, you need to make a choice here, because let's be fair, when we're also dealing with vendor directories, they are lowercased, right? So when you're talking about package name, they are lowercased. So Symfony hyphen blah blah blah, the components. All right, so there are certain, what I'm trying to say is there's certain cases where it's valid to have a lowercase and it's invalid to have lowercase. It really depends on the context that you're within. We are going to touch upon PSR in the future. Okay, so the next one is having backup folders. This is such a common thing that I've seen before, and I've done myself, especially in the early days of programming, where you're unsure about your change And so what you do is you back up the original file just so it's quicker for you to then quote unquote revert the change, right? Because all you're doing is changing the file name, or the folder name in this instance, back to what it was. However, if the codebase is stored in version control, then there is no need to have backup folders. The previous changes will be stored and can be reverted if needed. Only the code that is actively used in the stable code, or stable sort of mainline, if you will, should be committed to the version control system. Having redundant backup folders of the code increases technical debt and unnecessarily increases the code size. You know, I've seen cases where, and I've done it myself, where I will just take a backup of a whole folder just because I want to play around with a particular file, where really I could have just backed up that one file. Or, as I mentioned here, if we're playing with version control, which who isn't, right, then there is no need for this. There is no need for this whatsoever. And of course, backups have their own sort of, almost their own little standardizations itself, right? Because you could do -BKP, _BKP, right? It's not good. It's just wasting file size. It's just increasing technical debt. And you're just going to, when a new developer comes on and they see all of these BKP folders, they'll be like, well, which one's which? Which one's which? Which one is the most recent BKP folder? Okay. All right, the next one, excuse my coughing, is when reading a directory structure, each directory name should indicate exactly what it is containing. This is directory names that have zero meaning whatsoever. Zero meaning whatsoever. So, what's an example of that? An example of that is where we have abstract, or where we have base folders. Now, I've definitely seen this before in code. So we have an abstract folder, or even an interface folder that just holds all the interfaces, and an abstract folder that just holds all the abstract classes, or a base folder, and I really hate that term, the base. It's kind of like where we hold all of our God classes that have all of the methods that all the other classes that inherit that one use, and that's just a massive code smell. Yeah. But we put all of those in a little folder called base, and we just ignore all that, you know. So when reading a directory structure, each directory name should indicate exactly what it is containing. Directory names such as base or abstract offer little or no value to the developer. These directories only add nested complexity, and as there will be multiple base or abstract directories littered in the code base, it will be easy to get lost in the code structure. So yeah, let's say, for example, you've got a folder for entities, you've got a folder for repositories, you've got a folder for controllers, right? And then within those folders, you've got a subfolder called base or abstract, right? It's going to get very confusing as to which folder am I in? Which parent folder do I care about? Don't do that. Also, what I haven't mentioned here is where we're actually saying they hold no meaning, right? So the meaning needs to tell you what it is that is contained in that directory. So entities, I know that it's just going to be entities. Repositories, I know it's just going to be repositories. If I see anything else that isn't a repository in a repository directory, that is an issue. Same with controllers, right? Or same with commands. They have their own specific directories because they have their own specific files. Don't just litter directory names that have, or don't just apply directory names that hold no meaning to the actual contents that is being held within that directory. Okay. So the next one for this one is underscores and hyphens in directory names. So let's say, for example, we've got product underscore type, and we've got product hyphen type here, and we've also got entities hyphen backup there. Okay, so ideally a directory name shouldn't contain either hyphens or underscores. However, there are some exceptions, such as project names, namespaces, dates, and third-party package names. So, for example, a lot of the times where I see something where we deal with dates, right? So where we've got day, month, year, or year, month, day, there's normally like a hyphen or an underscore or something between the file name itself and that convention. Let's say, for example, you are doing something with, I don't know, like an image, and you want to have the date in that image. You would break that date away from the image name. So you'd have the image name and then maybe underscore or hyphen and then the date in which that was taken. Think of it like when you're doing a screenshot in a operating system such as a Mac OS. It breaks up the date. It says screenshot, and I believe it says something like screenshot hyphen and then the date in which the screenshot was given. You can go even further than this, especially when you're talking about dates, because you've also got hours, minutes, and seconds. You could have that. So you want to break that away from the date itself, because the date is numerical, and so is the hours, minutes, and seconds. So you may have, say, image name underscore date underscore time. What is much better, though, is just to use a timestamp, to be fair, if you're starting to get into that. Although timestamps aren't human readable. You can't just go, oh yeah, that timestamp that I'm seeing here, this epoch date, is the 22nd of June 1965. You can't, you just, yeah, if you're just seeing a string of numbers, you can't work that out really easily. So that's why we have these human readable dates on the file names and the folders. And they are sometimes separated with hyphens, even colons if we're dealing with time and whatnot. So that what I'm trying to say here is that there is always exceptions to these rules. It really depends on what it is that you're actually doing, and the context in which you're working within. However, whatever you do choose, I'm going to say this time and time again, whatever you do choose as a convention, you really, really, really need consistency across the board. All right, so if a hyphen or underscore is needed in the code base, then it is best to decide which standard to use and ensure that the rest of the code base conforms to this standard. Exactly what I have literally just riffed on. Let me just grab that a minute. That you should have hey, is there a video? I only have a black screen. Yeah, you should have a video. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I don't know. That's coming from Twitch. So I will, after this stream, I will definitely take a look and see if I can improve it for the next one, because there shouldn't be a black screen. There will, I will take a look at seeing if I can split these up maybe in the future. I don't know. Let me grab a drink. I'm going to go back to here. Let me just grab a drink. Can you open your stream on another device and take a look? Well, it's working on YouTube. So I don't know. I'm using Restream, so maybe it's not set up correctly on Twitch. But let me continue this, and what we'll do is, I tell you what, bear with me a minute. Let's see if we can get this to work, because this really should be running. Do apologize, everybody. Yeah, no, it's just saying offline, isn't it? That's not good. Right. Well, I think what we're going to have to do for this one is just continue down on YouTube. I'm very sorry, but I will promise to get this sorted next time. Gosh, that's really not good of me, is it? There is, I've got a feeling what I'm going to have to do is update the stream keys and whatnot, and so this is not going to work. So I'm really sorry about that for anybody who's trying to get to this on Twitch. It just isn't working. Twitch is not having playing ball with this. So sorry about all of that. Anyway, Um, yeah, thanks. Anyway, let's get back to where is the browser gone, or where is the code gone? There we go. Right. Sorry about this. So we've just talked about underscores and we've just talked about hyphens in directory names. And there are, like I said, there are certain cases where this is a good practice, but there are certainly cases, especially in the actual src directory, where this is not good practice at all. You really should be using Pascal case for directory names. We'll talk about that in a minute. I believe that is the last one. So let's go over to the good here. So this is a good example of a directory structure. So directory names, this is the good practice. In the good example, we see conformity. Let's just bring that down. Conformity amongst the directories and their containing files. So we've got entity. We've chosen that this is not pluralized. It is entity. There is one entity, or for every entity, there is one thing. It's not entities, right? We have a directory in here called product type. Again, it's not pluralized. We're using Pascal case. So we've got a capital P because we've got a capital E. This means we need a capital T when we get to the next word in this directory name. We're also using the file name here is abstract product type. All right, so you could imagine that there is another a file underneath this, which is product type, and product type would extend the abstract product type, for instance. Maybe, I don't know. But we don't have a folder called abstract, and we don't have that product type within the abstract folder, and then we don't have a product type within here, right? Yeah, it's just it is standardizing your code base. So what makes this good practice? There are no backup directories, BKP directories. There's no need because we have this in source control. Source control has historical records of our code changes, and we can go back in time and we can revert changes if we needed. We don't have to store backup files and folders and directories and whatnot within our code base. That is a code smell. It is increasing code size, increasing technical debt, and increasing code confusion. The abstract directory has been removed in favor of the file abstract product type. All directories and files are in Pascal case. Other conventions could be used as long as it is a standard across the code base. We'll talk about that. There's a little caveat that I want to mention there regarding PSR and all that jazz. And then all directories and files are not pluralized. Now, you've got to make a choice here, because if they are all pluralized, they should all be pluralized, in my opinion. If they're not all pluralized, then they should never be pluralized. This does throw a question mark though over. Maybe we'll talk about that when we get to the file names. I think we'll get there. There is another caveat that I want to discuss around this, because when you're describing what a file does, and if it's trying to interact with many different things, then you might be tempted to call it like, products rather than product. And there is a choice that you have to make as to if you're listing products, then what do you call it? That is a choice one has to make. But we'll get to that when we get to the file names. I am just gonna grab myself a little drink. Give me a second here, and let me just save all of this stuff. Let me just see what I've done. Let's do git diff. What have I done here? So we've changed all of this. That's oh yeah, that's all the spelling stuff, and we've added a new line into there. That's good enough for me. Let's git status. Let's do a git add. Oh, what did I do to that one? That was last time. Hang on, sorry, bear with me a minute. Git diff. What did I do to that one again? Oh, I just removed that. I'm just gonna git checkout on that, because that's not a change, is it? That's just There we go. So git, let's do a git diff again just to remind me. So that's a spelling thing, grammar, and there's a change there. That is in here. We're gonna put that back to what it was. Git checkout. So now we should just have that spelling change in here. We do. So git add of 6, git commit -m. We'll just put in typo fix. Cool. All right. Right, now bear with me a sec whilst I slurp some juice. I want to go back to here. Well, apart from not being able to do this on Twitch, I hope everybody can see and hear me well, and do let me know in the chat if you can't. For some strange reason, I did schedule this on YouTube, but as the stream happened, it gave me a completely new URL. So yes, I pushed this out to Instagram and other places as well, and they've all got the old URLs, so they're probably just again not going to see this, which is a shame. But anyway, I need to get a little bit more organized, pre-stream type stuff. Now, before I go any further, I want to have a little bit of a ranty moment. I want to talk about WordPress for a minute. As I mentioned previously, though, I don't want to fall down into the drama toxicity sort of side of all of this, but I was thinking about why is WordPress so popular, and this is kind of, and I've kind of come up with an answer for that, but I just want to use this as an opportunity to just kind of dump my thoughts out of my head. WordPress is an amazing blogging platform and content management system, to be fair, and it's been around for such a long time, and it is a very important part of the PHP ecosystem. But why is WordPress as popular as it is? Because as a developer, and I mean this with as much respect as possible, as a developer, it's not a tool that I would go for straight away. The WordPress is built for people that aren't me. And let's pick up that apart. So I'm a developer. I like to tinker around with things. I like to get into the engine. I like to change various bits and pieces. I like to the thing I like about Symfony, for example, something that I really like about Symfony is the fact that they offer the ability to use like a micro framework where you are in control over the dependencies and the packages that are installed. Now, you could say, well, surely that's the same with WordPress, because WordPress have plugins. And with the plugins, that gives you more control, and each plugin has settings and whatnot. But have you ever seen the WordPress database? And have you ever seen the code of those plugins? The code of the plugins, not all of them follow standards, as we've been talking about now, such as the PSR standards. Some of them are written in questionable PHP code. The database itself is optimized for being as flexible as possible. But the problem with that is it becomes archaic, in my opinion. And I mean this with the utmost respect. They have to make these technical decisions and build the platform in this manner for it to fit the purpose that it's trying to serve. But the point is, it's not really serving me as a developer. It's not a tool that I would use to do anything developer-y type stuff. Symfony, Laravel, love them, right? WordPress, if I needed to get something out of the door incredibly quickly, definitely use WordPress. And in fact, I've worked on projects as a contractor. I've worked on many projects where the clients have used WordPress in incredibly interesting ways that aren't actually blogs. They're like microsites or something like that, where they need to get something out the door very quickly, and they need to like market something very quickly, like a new product or a new service that they're doing. Or I've actually worked on places where they've used WordPress as like a members only site, that kind of stuff. And WordPress is the first decision that they make. It's like what platform do we want run this on? Well, WordPress, of course. Well, because, and it boils down to this, in my opinion, it boils down to this: frictionless. WordPress is incredibly, incredibly frictionless. What do I mean by frictionless? Well, you can spin up a VPS and use their one-click install, and within minutes, you have a WordPress site. So really, all you need is content, and you've got something. And that is, and it's the same thing with installing WordPress on all sorts of different platforms. So it doesn't matter if you're using DigitalOcean, or if you're using Linode, or if you're using AWS, or even if you're using containers, or if you're using just locally. You can be confident in the fact that there is no friction between you clicking the install button and having something which is usable within minutes. And I put this very close to, and I mean this in the utmost respect, I put this very close to Windows, right? So with Windows, way back in their XP days, or even now to be fair, but let's go back in time and XP. XP was such a good operating system because you could install XP in confidence that it's going to run on many different types of PCs. Windows XP was versatile, it was stable, it was reliable, right? Yes, it had problems. Sure, everything has problems, but you can install it confidently knowing that the keyboard is going to work, the display drivers are going to work, the audio is going to work. Everything is pretty much going to be working out of the box when you install that CD. You can't say that, or you couldn't say that, at least, back in that time, that era, with Linux. Because as soon as you start, I remember when I was installing Linux, way back then, when Linux came on multiple disks, and it would take hours. And you would be constantly hitting brick walls because, things weren't working. Drivers weren't installed. You would have to use the command line. That's insane. Why would you want to do that? Just to install an audio driver. And then you would have to do something with apt-get and repositories. What I'm saying is that XP was frictionless. Linux is built for developers. It isn't now because you've got obviously better iterations of the Linux desktop, definitely, and it's far more user-friendly, but it certainly isn't as user-friendly as Windows or as Mac. Now, the trade-off with all of this is that with Linux, you are in total control. So if you don't want something installed, A, it's probably not going to be installed there in the first place, and B, it's up to you to remove it. It's up to you to secure it. It's up to you to install the things that you need. It's up to you to make sure that the operating system and the software that is being used is good enough and works well enough with the hardware that you've customized. Whereas with Windows, it's just out of the box, boom. Now, I kind of see that very similar to WordPress. one-click install, done. And you can customize it as much as you want or as little as you want. Some people just don't even bother. They just have that as a block. They don't have any inkling or desire to change things under the hood of WordPress. They just click the install button, they give it a username and password, and off you go. And off you go. And that is fantastic. That is so good for the whole community, the PHP community, to have a product like that is the driving force of the web essentially. Is fantastic. And it's we should all be proud that is a PHP application. But as I said, it's not developed for me as a developer. Yes, I've built plugins, and yes, I've built themes and for WordPress stuff. And yes, I've tinkered around with the database and all of this jazz. But I would much prefer that those itches are scratched in other platforms where I know I have a little bit more control. Also, something that terrifies me completely is the fact that with WordPress, and again, this is the frictionless part, WordPress allows clients to update their plugins. So I could build a website for someone and I could charge them for it. And then in a month's time, I come back and I see the whole thing is just terrorized because they've installed half a dozen plugins. Some of them aren't even enabled. Some of them don't even work. And it was the client that's done that. I've had to fix so many WordPress sites in the past where they've just mentioned to me it's getting a little bit slow, it's getting a bit sluggish. There are certain pages that don't work and I don't really understand why. I've tried to do this and I've tried to do that. I've tried to install that plugin. I've tried to do this. And it's like someone coming to you to say, can you fix your printer? It's like, oh, okay. Yes, but you know, there is a market out there for people who are WordPress devs who look after WordPress sites, of course. But it freaks me out that there is the ability for clients that are non-technical people to be able to install things, run migrations in the database behind the scenes, do all of that stuff. That is a bit whoa. But again, I talk about frictionless. It's giving power and control to the clients. And that is giving the clients the control, the power, the opportunity to improve their own website, gives them their own confidence, their own power to do what they want to do, what they want to choose to do. Whereas if it was a Symfony site, or if it was something completely different, like a Laravel site or something totally different, then they would have to say to the developer, yeah, we want to add this new feature in, but because there isn't a plugin directory, we're going to need to get you to develop it. Whereas with a client of WordPress, they could probably just look at the plugins and stuff. Another thing that is fantastic with WordPress, which again goes back to the frictionless stuff, is the fact that you can search for plugins in the WordPress site. That's mad. Imagine if you had to search for plugins for various different things all over the place, a bit like Linux, really. Imagine having to search for drivers and commands and programs and stuff on the internet. Imagine if you had to do that without any kind of directories of WordPress. That would be crazy if they were just totally littered. And the way in which these plugins are offered to the clients is done in such a clever way that the client doesn't care about the versions. They just know that their version is out of date. But they don't care that this version conflicts with that version. It'll tell them. And the way they've done it is just fantastic. And so we should all be very, very proud. But this is why I think WordPress has done really well. And I think that if anybody wants to build an application, they need to really take into consideration the word frictionless. We want to get your customers to be able to do the thing that we are providing, the product, the service that we are providing, in the most frictionless way possible, from sign up to the thing that they want to do. That whole process needs to be as frictionless as possible. And yeah, so that was my little rant about WordPress. What does everybody else think? So Linux is like a car that somebody built for themselves. Yes, that's very true. Windows is like a car for someone who wants to drive somewhere. Yes, it is. Yeah, and they don't necessarily mind that there's, you know, an extra cup holder, or there's heated seats, but we're not going to use them. That's the thing. Going back to the WordPress plugins and whatnot, there is the opportunity for the client to increase the amount of bloat, the amount of changes to the database, the amount of technical debt on that WordPress site by literally just clicking buttons and installing things. And you get that from Windows, right? Because when you install Windows, it's got half a dozen programs that you won't ever use, but they're still there and they still need to be updated, and they will still conflict with other programs when versionings get out of shape. You know, it's a very clever way of providing someone with a platform that means that they are constantly going to need to update it, improve it, and work with it. And if you're giving that power to the client and not to the developer, then and you're doing it in a way that they feel confident about, then that's fantastic. Great power comes with great responsibility. Yes, let's leave that there. Great power comes with great responsibility. All right. So let's get back to these things. Let's just grab another shake of that. The creatine gets really disgusting at the end. It's like pretty much drinking sand, I guess. It's not nice, but it's better. This is the unflavored stuff. It's better than the flavored stuff. I hate that stuff. Ugh. It's like sweets, like drinking like liquefied sweets. Not nice. Anyway, excuse me a minute. Okay, so what's the next one? File names. Right. Where is the button that I need to press? VS Code. There we go. File names. That is the next one. Now you might think, well, the rules that we're putting in place with the file names are also the rules for directory names, but there are some differences, and we'll talk about those now. I'll tell you what, let's clear down all of this craziness. Okay, so there are some particular rules for PHP files based on PSR standards, as I've alluded to earlier. So there are some particular rules for PHP files based on PSR standards. In this tutorial, we are going to look at the following file names and consider if they are conforming to good or bad practices. Let me just change that. If they are conforming to good or bad practices. Okay, so we have this entity folder here, as we've discussed earlier. That is good. But look at all of these file names. We've got product type with a capital P, but we've got a hyphen and then a capital T for types. We've got Pascal case here and then an underscore and then BKP. So that's like Pascal plus snake case plus backup file. We also have these two, backup 1, backup 2, and we've also got that one. So we've got 3 backup files. We've also got this one, which is Pascal case, so product type. And we've got this one, which is Pascal case again, but it's pluralized, so product types. And then we've got this one, product types, but this is in snake case. And then we've got this one, which doesn't have any kind of convention. It's just product type. And we've got 2 T's like that. When I read this, I get very confused. Okay, so let's break this down. Backup files. Having backup files clutters the code base and will confuse the developer, as it isn't obvious which backup is the most recent version. In this case, the most recent version could be, let's just change that, could be product type underscore BKP or product type underscore BKP2, or even, let's just put that in, or there was this one up here, wasn't there? Product type BKP1, right? So there's 3 backup files. Now, as a developer, if I've just jumped on this code base which one is the most recent out of this? Because you might think, well, surely it would be the latest, number 2. But actually, I've worked on code bases where the latest is this one. So what they do is they say, okay, number 1 is always the most recent backup. And then when we want to create a new backup, what we do is we copy this, the last one, and then we put it underneath. And it just gets into a total mess because you end up with, well, how can that become a backup of that if that's not a backup of this? And yeah, total, utter mess. Avoid it like the plague. Avoid it like the plague. Okay, the developer would need to compare the file's timestamps to work out which file was created last. If the code is stored in version control systems like GitHub or Bitbucket, then there is no need to keep backup files, as the code repository will hold a historical record of the code changes. So these 3 are completely and utterly redundant if you are using a distributed version control system, a DVCS. If you are using a version control system, then you've got the power, the ability to look at the history of these files and see the changes that were made. The big change, the big shift in using version control systems is that the changes that we make to a file are now very small compared to what they used to be, where we were changing the whole thing. And so we would copy the whole thing. Now, we'll talk about perhaps my history in a minute of all of this craziness, but what I've also seen is people, they will comment out blocks of code and they'll put that at the top, right? And then they'll change the code that is currently active, but they'll still keep the old stuff, the backed up version, in a comment somewhere. That is just as bad. That is just as bad. Okay, let's scroll down. Okay, Pascal case versus snake case versus camel case. In terms of PHP files containing a PHP class, so now we're starting to talk about a PSR here. In terms of PHP files containing a PHP class, their file name should mimic the class name. The file names should either be in Pascal case or in snake case. All right. So the example shows. The example below shows 4 examples of PHP file names. If these contained PHP classes, then the last 2 file names, product type and that one, product type, would not be valid. So here we go. All right. So these 2 are not valid if they are classes. If they are classes, then, well, they're not really valid anyway. You've got camel case there. Which could be, but if they're classes, you really need to either choose between these Pascal case here or snake case, because you want to be conforming to PSR standards. If the file name was product type like this, so you've got Pascal case, capital P and capital T, then the contained PHP class would also be called product type, like so. Yeah, so we've got a class in here called product type. And we've got a file that is called product type. Now, as a developer, when I'm seeing this code base, that is exactly what I expect. All right. Okay, scrolling down a little bit. Likewise, if the file name was in snake case, such as product underscore type, then the containing class would also be called product underscore type, like this. Okay, and again, if a developer was to see product underscore type like this, they would assume that there is just one file, or one class, I should say, in that file that has the class name of product underscore type. Okay, scrolling down here. Hyphens should not be included in a PHP file name, as this goes against the PSR standards. So product capital P hyphen capital T types is not PSR compliant. All right, have I got a good example here? There we go. Okay, a good PHP naming convention will either be in Pascal or snake case and will conform to PSR rules such as you. Notice the file name product type is in Pascal case and is not pluralized, which matches the standard imposed by the directory name entity. Yeah, so entity is not pluralized, the contents is not pluralized. That is the name of the class that is within this file. Okay, cool. I'm going to take another swish of drink and then we're going to get into the good old PSR the old PHP interfaces type stuff. Give me a mo whilst I find the right button to click. Ah, yes. Okay, so now I found it useful. So Shirley Dev, is it Shirley Dev or Shirley Dev? I found it useful at the time. Then I learned how to use Mercurial or Git. Yeah, I used to do that. Comment out code. Yes, that you were changing. Yes, May Bface has asked, how long have I been a PHP developer? Yes. Okay, let's talk about that. Give me a second whilst I have a little drink. I really don't like people who, I mean, that's a horrible word. I don't like it, I should say. I don't like it when people drink or eat on in a meeting, especially eating. Drinking's not bad, you know, you have a coffee and whatnot whilst you're in a meeting. But yeah, I'm going to apologize a lot, but I'm trying to increase the fluid intake, especially when I'm doing these things. Surly. Okay, cool. I will try and remember that, Surly Dev. All right, so I was asked about my developer background. Let's go and let's discuss this. So I obviously am a PHP developer. I have been a developer since the early 2000s. I'm dating myself now. I am now 40 years old. And through that time, I've worked on all sorts of crazy stuff, including Perl, including C, including Java, JavaScript, Python, all manner of crazy things. I studied web development at university, and I've done 2 college courses. I've worked for hosting companies as a full-time developer. I've worked for startups as full-time. I've worked in digital agencies as a full-time dev. I've also been a freelancer. So I've worked on mobile applications before. I've built mobile applications before, and especially APIs, the back-end stuff. I've also dealt with a lot of database bits and pieces here and there. Right now, and for the past probably 6, 7, maybe 8 years, I'll need to work this out. But for a long time, I've been a contractor. And I've had so many great projects as a contractor, as a PHP contractor. Some have been more of a consultancy role, whereas some have been more hands-on. Some have been like, we have this problem and we need to fix it, but we don't know how. Can you have a look? That kind of stuff, right? And so I've had a very varied career in terms of the industries that I've worked in, the people, the companies that I've worked for, the challenges that I've faced. And when I was starting out, this is going to date me completely. When I was starting out, JSON wasn't really a thing. XML was king. I was actually studying ActionScript of all things, so Flash, as well as Java. The very first programming language that I actually did was it? Can you remember? I can't remember what it's called. The BBC stuff. With a pressure pad and all of that jazz. I've also done Visual Basic 6. That was the first time I actually dealt with data going into a database, Visual Basic 6 and Microsoft Access. From that, I then did all sorts of stuff with MySQL, Oracle. I've done various things with NoSQL stuff, MongoDB. I've done things with DynamoDB. I've done all crazy stuff with all sorts of various different things. I've done migrations from various frameworks to another framework. I've worked on all sorts of things in terms of Python and APIs and IoT. Obviously I can't really delve into various, the details, the granular details of things, but it's been fun and I've really enjoyed the challenge. I really have. And I would love to be able to teach people and talk about my experiences and ensure that the new developers who come on board don't make the same mistakes that I did as a junior dev, because there was a lot of time spent, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain going through that process. And I really do feel for junior devs, because they are swimming in a humongous ocean where you've got lots of dotted little islands and you don't really know which island to swim to first. Yeah. VB6 for the win. Yes, definitely. Microsoft Access was awesome. Now, the other thing I should mention is that I went through the period of trying to work out in my head the difference between SVN and Git. And when I was first working on enterprise stuff, very, very early in my career, we were all on SVN. Subversion. Can you remember Tortoise SVN? And I was within that group of people, that era, where we were making the move to Git. And so the whole dynamic of how code is stored and even how code is written completely changed because of that transference from SVN to Git. Because with SVN, of course, there was the need to create certain backups of things. There was the need to create like comments of code if things didn't work, because it wasn't as distributed as Git. There wasn't really the what we would see today as a merge request or a pull request, right? So a lot of these things that I'm teaching here today regarding the good practice stuff and other things in PHP in general, a lot of the things that I'm teaching they've come in as I've been a developer, and I've seen I know the reason why they're here, because I was working with the code when they weren't enforced. And so I know what the pain is like when you've got all of these backup stuff going on. I know the trouble, how the challenge it was from going from SVN to Git. And before SVN, I was working on FTP, right? And with FTP, you've got a whole world of other problems, because you could be working on the same file as someone else. So it's all done in time, right? So you've got to make sure that when you FTP a file up, someone else isn't FTPing the same file up with a different change, right? And that's where a lot of the backup files came in, because what you wanted to do was you wanted to FTP a file, you wanted to make a change to the file, but you also wanted to keep the original file, because there was certainly no source control then, back in those days, right? That was your source control, your FTP, your file system was your very loosely termed source control, right? And so with FTP, you often saw all of these _BKP files. And then with SVN, I would see a lot of these comments of code, right? So we've done this piece of work, but we're commenting out the previous piece of work. This change has come in. You had all sorts of other things with, different branching strategies. You had trunk, which was just mad. And then, of course, back in those days, you had a whole different way of deploying sites, right? You had a whole different way. It was mostly waterfall, big bang releases. There wasn't, like I said, there wasn't the concept of a pull request. You know, so I want to just change this one little line of code here, and I just want to deploy that one file, which you can do these days. You know, you can just say, oh, especially with like things like mono repos, you can just say, okay, I want to deploy this piece of the code base, or I want to deploy this piece of the code base. Or even if we go even further than that, where you've got, say, composer packages, I want to actually isolate this feature and make it a composer package. And so I want to make a change to that. Back in the day, we didn't really have Semver. We didn't have Composer at all. So all of these, and the thing is, a lot of developers now will look at all of the toys that we've got, and they'll go, "Oh my God, this is so complicated. This is such a mess. Why is it so complicated?" But it's complicated because of all the reasons that I've just discussed. It was a bit of a Wild West back then. Now we have a lot more standards, and we're able to conform to various things. It makes a lot more sense, to me at least. But I'm more than happy to, you know, hold the junior developer's hand and walk through this process. And at least I have stories to tell about why these things are in place, because back then it was the Wild West. Right, let's get into some PHP interfaces, shall we? Let's go to, where are we? VS Code. There we go. And give me a second whilst I grab a little bit more. All right, so we've just discussed file names. Let's talk about the specifics of files, right? So what the specific types of files? So interfaces, let's go with that. The bad example, I think what I've done on these things is probably, I shouldn't call that bad, because I think I've talked about the good practices in here too. But anyway, PHP interfaces must conform to PSR standards. They must be suffixed with interface, and they must contain a PHP interface, right? So there's no point in calling it an interface if it doesn't have an interface in it. In the below example, only the last interface is correctly named. So product type interface. So we've got product type I've seen that before. We've got interface product type, I've seen that before. And we've got product type interface. This one is the valid one. This one is the valid one. Okay, and I've got a link here to the PSR naming conventions, but due to time, we're going to push on, I think. So let's just recap. PHP interfaces must conform to PSR standards. They must be suffixed with interface, and they must contain a PHP interface, because there is no point in having an interface if it doesn't have an interface, right? If in the below example, only the last interface is correctly named product type interface, like so. We're going to swiftly move on to the PHP trait. It's very similar, because the product type needs to have the trait at the end. So PHP traits must conform to the PSR standards. They must be suffixed with trait, and they must contain a PHP trait. So that is correct. PHP type trait, that is the correct one. Finally, today we're going to discuss the PHP abstract class. Now this is different, because notice with the traits here, the traits and the interfaces, right? These are all suffixed, whereas with abstract, we actually need them prefixed. So PHP abstract classes must conform to the PSR standards. They must be prefixed with abstract, and they must contain a PHP abstract class. In the below example, only the first abstract class is correctly named. So abstract product type.php. So we've got a product type, and we've got product type abstract. But the one that is the standard is abstract product type. So let's just quickly recap over those three, okay? Because they are kind of bounded together. All right, so PHP interfaces. PHP interfaces must conform to PSR standards. They must be suffixed with an interface, and they must contain a PHP interface. In the below example, only the last interface is correctly named, product type interface.php. So these two, product type I and interface product type, are incorrect. They're not following PSR standards. If we look at the PHP trait here, So PHP traits must conform to PSR standards. They must be suffixed with trait, and they must contain a PHP trait. In the below example, only the last trait is correctly named, which is product type trait. Notice that this is Pascal case as well. Product, capital P, capital T for type, and capital T for trait there. So these two, product type T and trait product type, are invalid in the eyes of the PSR standards. The valid one is product type trait in Pascal case like that. This is different, of course, for the abstract classes. So abstract, PHP abstract class. In the below example, only the first abstract class is correctly named, abstract product type. And that is because PHP abstract classes must conform to PSR standards. They must be prefixed with abstract, prefixed, so this is different from traits and interfaces. This is where a lot of people get confused. They must be prefixed with abstract, and they must contain a PHP abstract class, obviously. So these two, sorry, even I'm getting it wrong. These two are incorrect. So a product type and product type abstract, these are invalid. This one is the valid one. Excellent. Well, that is that. That is what I'm going to teach today with font. There's so many more things that I'm going to be adding to this list. One thing that I have recently realized is I haven't actually talked about what PSR is, so we'll probably do that next time, and we'll probably put that as maybe 0, because that's a good sort of introduction as to what is PSR and why we should we bother conforming to these standards. And yeah, but there's, like I said, there's so many more things in here, and I also want to get into the nitty-gritty bits of code as well, like why certain behaviors of or not behaviors, why certain code written in a way is bad practice, especially around things like loops, where we're looping over code. Then there's design patterns, and then there's, say, things like, you know, how class names should be called, how method names and function names should be called, you know, making sure that the return type is correct, all of those kind of things. We can delve into some strictness, some typing, if we wanted to, and maybe possibly actually have example applications, just like example pieces of code where this is done in bad practice and then this is done in good practice, and we compare the two. And I can then give you an indication as to why excuse me, why it's good practice. Excuse me. Apologies. Yes. Still getting over this nasty cold. Anyway, I am going to shoot off. Thank you ever so much for watching, everybody. I really do appreciate it. Happy coding, and I'll see you again next time. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.